Hello, my name is Amol Patel. You're watching the Smoking Hot Coffee Show, where every day, Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we talk to startup founders and people from the startup world. I'm joined with...
Hey guys, I'm Jeff Pelton down here in San Diego.
And today we've got Jeff Wood from WelchAvenue.com. It was a really great interview. Jeff is from Des Moines, Iowa. He's part of the startup community there. He talked about his history creating a podcast there, about creating a news organization that covered startups in that area there. He talked about his successful Kickstarter campaign. He actually shared quite a bit about the whole scene out there. Jeff, tell us a little bit about what he's doing there with Welch Avenue.
Yeah, Welch Avenue is a startup community and a web show that he's putting on, hosted out of Des Moines, Iowa. You can check out the Kickstarter page. He successfully raised, 5 times his goal amount. So we chat a little bit about that and, what that means coming up for him in the coming year to shoot the podcast and, some of the strategy he has with the newsletter to keep Iowa together kind of as a community, make sure that he promotes the news that the community is looking for.
Yeah, and so any geography, any sort of scene or sector or market if you want to call it that. Usually, if you're the thought leader or the person that's going out and talking to people or networking and putting together a blog, podcasting is one way of getting your name out there if you don't feel like writing. And I've said many times to people that are willing to listen, this Smoking Hot Coffee is a great vehicle for me just to meet other entrepreneurs. And so if you're out there and you've got a startup and you want to become a thought leader in your space, creating a podcast is a fantastic way of doing that. It doesn't mean you have to do startups. You can talk about your space if you're in the financial sector, if you're doing a startup that's based on a marketplace for some other, let's say house cleaners, let's say. Blogging is one way to create content. Podcasting is another, and he shares his story on that. And Kickstarter is a fantastic vehicle to raise money, so at least that part is funded.
Yep, and he is partnering with 1 Million Cups, a Kauffman Foundation program that has a local event in Des Moines every week, I believe. And so they partner with them, and so they shoot on location and really kind of joins the community together, I think, is something they can get behind. It's really a great way for everyone to stay up to date and keep each other motivated on the startup community.
Yeah, and so, if you want to learn more about that, definitely check out the show. And we shoot this thing every day, Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We look forward to all your comments and feedback. Send us email at info@smokinghotcoffee.com. Jeff?
Yep, and it would be great if you guys subscribe to our iTunes podcast and our YouTube channel, and tell your friends about us if you enjoyed this episode.
Great, and so with that, let's cut to our show. Thanks for coming on the show today, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you on the show.
So, there are many reasons why you should be on. The first and foremost is, you're a podcaster, you cover startups, and you raise money on Kickstarter. I mean, there's like 3 massive reasons why you're a perfect guest.
Oh, well, it's awesome to be here. I recorded my own podcast this morning, so this is kind of double dipping on podcast day. It's different to be somebody else's guest instead of having my own, so this will be fun.
Well, cool. Let's get into let's get into a little bit of your background, your backstory, really briefly. Why did you start doing podcasting? What was the itch you're trying to scratch? That kind of thing.
Well, this is actually the second podcast that I put together. The first one was called Prairie Cast. And we did that with a group I used to work with called Silicon Prairie News that wrote about entrepreneurs in the Midwest. I'm in Des Moines, grew up here, really care about this community. So Silicon Prairie News covers Des Moines, Omaha, and Kansas City, which is kind of a triangle all about 2 to 2.5 hours apart from each other. Okay. And I just consume a ton of podcasts, so I'm like, I want to make a podcast, and started doing that with this idea of let's talk about the news that we've written on the blog, let's interview entrepreneurs. And had a lot of fun with that over about 2 years. Ended that in 2012, like probably March of 2012. And ever since that was done, people would say to me like, hey, when are you going to bring back the podcast? And I would always say, oh, that's a lot of work. I'm never going to do that. And earlier this summer, I just kind of got the itch. And I'm like, somebody said something to me, and I said, well, maybe let's see about bringing it back.
Well, hold on a second. You said you had a first podcast, and then you stopped. Why did you stop?
I really stopped because I was kind of moving out of the news part of the organization into running the business, the startup that was Silicon Prairie News. So
Okay.
I wasn't as close to the people that we were covering because I was working on the business. And it got harder to prep for it, and it became a longer process. And about that same time, we got an offer from a startup and an entrepreneur that we had on the show several times, a gentleman named Ben Milne. His company's Dwolla. They do online payments, kind of using their own network, flat fee. Great company.
Right.
Kind of the most known startup in Des Moines, I think.
Yep.
And they had scored this great investment from somebody that cares about Iowa that's not here, a tech investor, and they said, we kind of want to do something for Iowa when we announce this investment. Could we have him come on the show?
Oh.
So we did that, and we're like, yeah, that'd be cool. That turned out to be Ashton Kutcher investing in Dwolla. So our last episode, by far our highest trafficked episode, was that. So it's kind of like George on Seinfeld, and it's like, drop the mic, that's it, I'm out of here, just go out on top.
Great way to go out. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So you got Ashton Kutcher. Obviously, hometown does big in Hollywood, is trying to give back. That's great.
Yeah, and it's not so much that I got Ashton Kutcher; it was Dwolla got Ashton Kutcher, and they let us have him on the podcast. But it was awesome to have him on.
Wow. Okay. So you went out on a high note. I'm assuming because the business interests were taking more of your time, you couldn't prep enough. What was one of? I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience doing the show. I've met so many great people. This is one of the best vehicles for networking, in my opinion. What have you also found beyond just obviously enjoying talking to people from a business perspective, advantages for doing podcasts?
Well, I think it's important to, like I said, I'm a huge consumer of podcasts. So for me, it was important to give back in a way and to see how I could kind of contribute to that ecosystem. I don't always want to be a taker, but I also want to be somebody who's kind of sharing that.
Right.
Working on behalf of startups in Iowa, and kind of the company I've created is focused on that. We kind of suffer from our own internal pressure to not talk about what we're doing, and I think this goes back in society to farming, and you don't brag about the fields you farm. That's just the mentality. Even though I've never lived on a farm in my life,
Right.
That's just pervasive in our culture. So a little bit of our mission with this company is we need to tell the stories of the people who don't tell their own stories. We need to brag about them because they're not going to do it themselves. And having a vehicle like a podcast, we can get that word out there. And yeah, I mean, who knows? Those things live forever. It's on the internet, right? So that story the stories can be told for years on it.
Wow, that's really great.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, those videos will be there forever.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so obviously around town, maybe at some events or whatever, you started running into folks, people asking you, hey, when are you going to bring that back? That was a really, wonderful service you're putting together for our community. Did you feel at times like I should bring it back, but I wasn't making any money, or what was the thing that needed to happen before you actually brought it back?
Well, I think the biggest piece was time, of not having time to really dedicate to it and make it the show that we wanted it to be, or that I wanted it to be. So some things changed in my life earlier this summer. All of a sudden I was like, well, maybe I should be doing some things different. And the first, just the timing worked out, and somebody said, well, what about bringing back the podcast? I'm like, that could be a fun thing to work on this summer. Wasn't sure about funding it. We'd had some sponsors with the other one, but they weren't consistent, and it wasn't as much as we would have liked. So I basically boiled down to got the idea of let's vet that there's actually a market and interest in the podcast, as opposed to just creating it and hoping someone watches it. And I use Kickstarter to validate that market. Put together a campaign. My co-host, his name's Chris New, Christopher New on Twitter if you want to follow him. He's a video producer, cares about startups, and he filmed me, and we kind of worked through the Kickstarter video. And really just said, let's say $1,000. If we can raise $1,000, we'll do 10 episodes, $100 an episode to kind of cover minimum costs. But that'll tell us that it's not just people asking about the podcast to have something to talk about. It's people that actually are willing to put their money up and say, we want this podcast to come back. And we passed $1,000 in 2.5 hours. So we blew past that. And so Chris and I got together and said, we should probably have some stretch goals, and kept saying okay, well, if we get to this amount, let's do 20 shows. And if we get to this amount, we'll do 30. And that was $5,000. And I said I'd do a full year if we got to 7,500, but I kind of stopped pushing it because we didn't really want to get to 7,500 and kind of have that pressure. So the campaign just closed this weekend. It was about right under 5,500. So
Wow.
we are eagerly awaiting all the the transfer fees with Kickstarter and the transfer fees just to get that. And I owe some people money because we started the show already. We've done 3 episodes.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
raised our cup of coffee.
Yeah,
to
raise
you.
our cup of coffee.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Successful
I
funding on the
appreciate
show. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, that really is an amazing feat. You know, what do you think the power is of getting the pre-funding? You know, we hear this a lot from entrepreneurs, even talking about like not building the product until they have customers. You know, with landing pages and things like that. You know, was Kickstarter transformative for you in that way? Would you not have done the podcast, brought it back if you didn't have this vehicle?
I think I certainly wouldn't be as committed to it if I didn't have the Kickstarter. And I've kind of made the joke that when we started the last podcast, it was me and a buddy in his spare room kind of recording, and if people didn't like it, they didn't like it. But now there are expectations behind it, and there's some accountability from the community that wants to see it. I have 62 people that were willing to give at least $1, you know, and sum up, I think our highest donor was $1,000.
Wow.
To seeing this come back. And so I need to do that on their behalf. And we want to make this an Iowa-based podcast, so I've committed to traveling around the state. At least once every 10 episodes, we're going to do one on site in another city, talking to startups in that city. So yeah, just really have that feeling. So I certainly wouldn't feel as accountable to making it happen, and as accountable to like having a quality production. And that's what a lot of people have told me. It's different between like the single camera recording in our office that we did last time and what we're doing now. We have 3 cameras. We hired an intern technical director from a local university, Frank in Moscow. Great kid who is like running the board and switching cameras while we're doing the show, and really just trying to like deliver a quality product for all of these people. And then hopefully you guys that may not know as much about Iowa, if you catch an episode, you'll be like, it's really cool what's going on there.
Yeah.
Right.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a great way to find out for people that aren't in town, obviously. You know, with the internet, people can just share it.
So let me get into a little bit of the tactics, because a lot of people that watch the show want to, you know, maybe get a couple of takeaways. What was some of the key things that you did to make this such a success?
The Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question. You know, I had used Kickstarter to back like the Pebble Watch. I did that one. I don't know if you guys are Pebble Watch people. And then a startup weekend project that some friends did, but I wasn't like fully immersed in the Kickstarter ecosystem. Like I was looking at some of the people that I didn't know that backed our project, and like somebody had backed 2,000 different projects, and just really looking at just crazy. But what I did notice in some of the other podcasting ones, I went out and looked at other podcasts. Like there was a Breaking Bad analysis podcast that had raised like $5,000, and I like the show, but like I don't know that I would have given money to that. But that was interesting to see. And those are just like 2 dudes sitting in chairs talking about like talking about Breaking Bad.
Sure.
So I'm like, I think we can put together a better video than this. I know that we have already have kind of a following for what we do, like because of the work that I did in my previous role at Silicon Prairie News, people look, you know, kind of follow what I'm doing to know what's going on with startups. So it was easy to get the word out like that. And then the tech press in Des Moines is pretty easy to get a hold of. I know the writers that care about startups, so kind of feeding them and just getting the word out there pretty quickly. And yeah, once we did, it just kind of took off.
Okay, so you said you reached out to local press, local tech press.
I did.
And was there any other outreach?
Just social channels, really.
So when you say social channels,
Facebook,
you're talking about your own
and Twitter, and then there were people that just found it by browsing Kickstarter, like a guy in Texas.
So your personal Twitter and your personal Facebook, is that what you're?
Yes.
Very cool. Well, I have to say,
yeah, exactly. Just pushing it out that way, and then.
I have to say, a lot of, you know, obviously your history with doing podcasts for, you know, whatever it was, a year or two, you built up your Twitter audience that way as well. And so you had that sort of investment already there. And then obviously once you send out that, hey, we're doing a Kickstarter campaign, you're able to leverage that investment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you clearly had a demand from it, from your prior audience, you know, when you said you passed your 1,000 goal, you know, pretty quickly. So, you know, I think, you know, how much do you lend to that audience that, you know, was demanding for it to get you over the line?
Yeah, I fully credit them with getting us there. I guess the other piece that I didn't mention is there is an organization called 1 Million Cups. Really, it's a program that's put on by the Kauffman Foundation, and which, if you guys don't know, Kauffman is kind of the world's leading foundation focused on entrepreneurship, and based in Kansas City. And I know a lot of people at the Kauffman Foundation. They'd supported other projects that I'd worked on. They started this in their office. Each week they have 2 people come in, pitch their startups. It's 6 minutes, you pitch. It's not pitch for investments, like let people know what you're working on, and then 20 minutes of questions, and then they do a second one. Well, they decided to expand that outside of Kansas City, and Des Moines was the first city they went to. Some friends of mine organized it here. So I kind of call that like Rotary for the startup community, or if you guys have ever been to like a church experience where after the service there's a like fellowship hall where everybody kind of like shakes hands and talks about what they're up to this week. Like that's Des Moines fellowship hall for the startup community, and I really like going to it. We immediately decided that we wanted to record the podcast in the coffee shop where that takes place, after it takes place, for several reasons. But once we announced that to that group that we want to partner with you, they helped fund it. So it's a lot of people that go to that event also are people that want to see it.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's really smart to work with an event like that, and then you have all the locals around it to gather around and support the cause.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Jeff, I have to say I've found this to be a common theme with all very successful Kickstarter campaigns, is that there's this sort of really nice video that they've prepped, and they got sort of their press outreach or their blogger outreach, and you kind of need to do a little bit of homework instead of just hoping for the best, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there are lots of projects that don't get funded, but that's as much on you kind of mobilizing your idea as it is whether the idea is valid or not.
Well, we had a team out of Sweden called Flatter. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I haven't.
Basically, it's like you click and then you basically will donate to whatever digital products. One of the digital products that they feature on their site is a podcaster out in Germany. Is that right, Jeff? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so. They basically hacked it to become a paywall for digital downloads or content, but it's sort of a like button for micro donations.
Yeah, micro donations. That's it. And he was on the show and he talked a lot about how this one podcaster is doing really well with this button. And Jeff and I, off camera, talk almost every other day about how we're going to find a way to extract a sustainable living wage out of doing this. So Kickstarter is definitely one we've thought about, and here we go. You're an example of somebody that's pulled it off.
Yeah, that's the flat. It's called Flatter, you said?
Flatter, yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out too, because you guys listen to like Leo Laporte's This Week in Tech, like those type of shows, and
yeah, absolutely.
I've been a big consumer of his stuff for a long time, and they have the little tip button where you can, if you like the show, where you can tip every month. And at one point, I don't know if he's still doing this, but he said like he doesn't take a salary. He pays his staff a salary, but he only takes money out of the company based on tips. And so I also like that idea of like, if it was a quality show, throw us a few bucks. That can be I've committed to not taking any personal money out of this Kickstarter campaign. It's all going to the equipment and the travel and pieces that we have and our intern. But wouldn't mind making some cash on this as part of what we do. So but the tipping and the micro donation, I think that makes a ton of sense, and that really fuels creative people to keep doing what they're doing. Somebody liked what I did. That's awesome. That type of stuff.
Absolutely. So if you're not taking salary, do you have a business on the side, or you got a full-time job, that kind of thing? I'm just curious.
Not, well, kind of no to all of those. Just I'm kind of in a spot where I don't need to take a salary right now, and figure out what I want to do in the long term. And doing this is something to keep me connected to the community and seemed interesting to people. So I got started with that this summer. I also do a part of the Welch Avenue company I'm putting together is this weekly newsletter. Okay. I do this on Tuesdays. It's the Welch Avenue. I use the Tiny Letter platform. If you've ever seen that, Phil Kaplan developed that and sold it to MailChimp. But that was an idea that came from somebody back when I was with Silicon Prairie News that told me that there's just too much tech press. I don't watch any of it. Like I just trust that Twitter will bubble up what's important, and I trust that I have a good network to do that. So I was thinking about attacking that problem of there being too much tech press, and came up with the concept of I'll pick the top 3 links, because I like reading the tech press, top 3 links that are of interest to our community this week. And I'll put those in there. It's like a 1-line link, and then include a 2-sentence, basically my analysis of the story. Like trying to think of this week's top one. Oh, Singly. I don't know if you know the company Singly, which was founded by an Iowan who actually still lives here and commutes to Silicon Valley. They just were acquired by Appcelerator. So his name's Jeremy Miller. He's the guy that invented Jabber. You guys might know Jeremy. Good dude. And anyway, so he had just had his company acquired. So because it's not a company that we read about every day, you may not know that, but I wanted to draw everybody's attention to this story of interest to Iowans. So created that newsletter. We actually talk about the newsletter on the show too. After we do an interview on the podcast, we do Tech News of the Week based on what I put together into the newsletter. And I think there are sponsorship opportunities with both the podcast and with this. With the campaign on Kickstarter, I can go to sponsors now and say, look, I have this committed audience. They're willing to put their own money into this. Don't you want to be in front of those people with your products? And so I think there can be revenue in the future when I need to start making revenue on it. But right now I'm just kind of figuring out what I want to be when I grow up.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Well, it's great to be able to take that time to explore and adventure. I think that's a good part of being an artist and an entrepreneur. Let me ask a random question about podcasting. What do you think about the content of podcasts, like interviews versus news versus maybe something else? I think often we kind of fit into these boxes, but with the creativity of the internet, there's really no restrictions.
That's a good question. I think about the podcasts that I listen to. I listen to comedy, I listen to tech, I listen to Stanford lectures. I just listen to anything and everything. So what's great about that ecosystem is that you can create anything you want. You'll probably find an audience if you can get out there for it. So I tend to do interviews because that's what I think a lot of people want, but I listen to all sorts of things myself. What do you get, besides Smoking Hot Coffee, what podcasts do you guys listen to?
Well, like you mentioned, I followed Leo from his old screensaver days, as a kid, basically, to This Week in Tech, and really appreciated what he was doing over there, the entrepreneurship. Don't watch it all the time, but it's a great show. And This Week in Startups down in LA, the Calacanis show is decent every once in a while to get some. He gets some really great guests on, extracts some really good information from them from time to time.
Yeah, I'm kind of same with Jeff. I tend to focus on startups, entrepreneurism. That's kind of my big thing.
Stanford eCorner is great. They get really good people there. Yeah.
I was gonna say the podcasting typically tends to be audio only, MP3. But I'm particularly interested in the video format. And it'd be really great to see more sort of, I do a lot of design work, and it'd be great to see more visual. I haven't explored that enough, but I think there's probably some really good designer-oriented video podcasts. So
I can see that. In talking with my co-host, Chris, I put the Kickstarter campaign together, and I specifically called it a podcast because I consume it as a podcast and things. But he really pushed me to say, it's more of a web show. So that's why we wound up calling it the Welch Avenue Show. So we produce it for video, but I consume it in audio. So that's something we haven't quite got over there. But, we have 3 cameras. We do the switching, that type of thing. So the idea is it is a web show. Even though in my head I still default to I'm an Instacast guy on my phone. That's how I listen to all of my podcasts. So that's an interesting dichotomy and kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've thought about that problem a lot as just amateur podcasters ourselves, or broadcasters, or whatever you call it. Do you find it difficult? Do you think it's worth having 3 cameras and a switcher to put out an audio podcast, or is there definitely an audience for it?
It's a good question. We get a handful of people that watch live, and we live stream through the live stream platform, and then put out the produced version after. And I think it's too recent. The 3rd episode isn't out. That's what we recorded this morning. It'll be out tomorrow. So I don't know if it is worth it or not yet, but I know the live stream people really enjoy watching it live, and they comment and they joke with each other inside the chat, inside of live stream. So I think the video is the place to go. With a long format podcast, I want to get it to 45 minutes. We tend to run about 50 with ours.
Right.
I don't sit and watch for 50 minutes of video on the internet very often.
Right.
So like we have some places that we can fine tune for sure. But
yeah, we've noticed, and maybe you can give your feedback on this, but we've been putting up a lot of our videos up on YouTube, and our stuff tends to be more than 45 minutes, sometimes more than an hour. And I think when people see the thumbnail and they see the 45 minutes or 1 hour, and that kind of scares them away from sampling the content. And so Jeff and I have talked about maybe possibly cutting out 5-minute bits and that kind of thing as a way to draw an audience on YouTube. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you have Ashton Kutcher on the show, your YouTube views will go up. I know that from experience.
Right.
So maybe start there.
We have to get an Ashton Kutcher mask, Jeff, this Halloween.
Yeah. That's not a bad idea. That or we get him on the show.
Yeah.
Actually, when I left Silicon Prairie News, that post that had the embed of the YouTube was the highest traffic post that the company had ever had on the site. So I imagine it's still there. That's some great SEO. Yeah, that's a good question. We don't do a whole lot of editing with ours. We do cut in an intro, and then we have credits, which is part of the live stream or the Kickstarter campaign. We said we'd recognize you as a producer if you gave at $100, and so we have those pieces. We actually put our first video in the middle of it today, like something we'd pre-produced. So kind of that, which all lends more to the show and less podcast kind of idea with it. But I'm using Vimeo specifically to stay away from YouTube right now, just because the kind of toxic nature of the comments on YouTube and just being lost in there. I think there's we used YouTube with the last podcast, but that's where we're starting out anyway, to see if people are willing to watch Vimeo a little longer than YouTube, I think.
Yeah.
Just because they see that difference.
Yeah, I agree. I completely
Interesting.
agree. Yeah.
Reception.
So let's go into the startup scene in Iowa. We haven't really covered that. What's going on over there? What are the hot startups that you're excited about?
Well, specifically in Des Moines, where I am, this is kind of a finance and insurance city. Wells Fargo's home mortgage division is based here. Lots of old school banks that have been here for a long time, and then like Nationwide Insurance has 6 square blocks of downtown that are all their employees, and Principal Financial Group is based here. So we have a lot of those because that's what the workforce is, I think, and that's what people are geared to understand. We have a lot of financial tech startups that are here, and a lot is probably relative, but that is a good group of what we have. And I mentioned Dwolla already. They're the ones that by far get most of the headlines and are doing great things. Another one I'd talk about is Web Filings. Have you ever heard of these guys?
No.
They're in Ames, which is part of Central. That's where Iowa State University is. So it's about 15-20 minutes north of Des Moines, and in the university's research park there. But it's kind of like TurboTax for SEC filings, is how I've heard it described.
Oh, okay.
But they're up to like 600 employees now, so they're kind of past the startup stage. But they're co-located between Ames and Mountain View. One called Smarty Pig, which is an older startup here that is a social savings and online goal progress tracking startup relative to financial goals.
Okay.
Guys like that. I mean, another one called Banno, which does like kind of banking related technology. So I see a lot of those as the ones that like get past the 1 or 2 person like getting started stage and are in that, like, we have investors. Dwolla has Union Square Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz in it, so they're
Big
bringing
guys,
in Coastal guys.
Yeah. Is there a homegrown sort of couple angels there that are on the lookout that you notice at some of these meetups or some of these gatherings?
Not as many as you'd like.
There's never as many as you like. Same thing here, man. I'm sure it would be great to have 40 more, but yeah.
I would say that the ones that are known in town are more interested in biotech and less in software.
Okay.
So it's not that they're not active; they're just not active in the space that I pay attention to. Ben Milne from Dwolla has commented both on his blog and in public a couple of times in the last few years that he believes that there are angels here, and what we need to do is be more vocal about our angels, like talking about like if you want to get started with an idea, these are the guys that you should go see. And there's a start. They're actually our second guest, our podcast last week. The guy's called Cluster Flunk. Flunk, F-L-U-N-K.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Flunk. Okay.
So these guys are in Iowa City, which is about 2 hours east of here. It's where the University of Iowa is, which is
cool.
the rival to Iowa State, where I went. But these two guys, I think they're both 21 years old, built software with this idea of I'm in a 500-person lecture hall in like a Psych 101 type of class. Right. How do I get to know other people in this class? And not for a social reason, but more for let's share notes or test files, or I have a question, who do I ask? And so they built software not unlike kind of the blackboards and things you see in universities today, but specifically not having something the university bought, like it's student-driven software. Right. And they're just go-getter, hustler guys, and they worked on it for a year, and they met Ben, and they met 3 other angels in Des Moines. I guess there's 4 of them total. Basically wound up raising $100,000 this summer. Both quit school or put school on hold to full-time work on this, and so it was great now that we see Ben doing angel investments of his own, he's very public about saying, like, I believe in this company, I'm willing to put money into it, and those other 4 guys did as well. So we're starting to see some of that maturation that wasn't there 2-3 years ago when Ben was starting Dwolla.
Wow. That's so awesome, great. Man. I love that. It'd be great to hear Ashton come back and, start a little fund over the Des Moines Fund. Yeah, that would be awesome. Obviously we all pay attention to what he's done in the startup community, and he is a guy that's back for football games and things. Like it's not strange to hear about him being back at something, but I was waiting for him to invest in a company here because he's obviously, in all sorts of Silicon Valley companies and has been for years. So it was great to see that in him invest in Dwolla, and then the other kind of celebrity, like the big guys that have invested there. There's no fund yet specifically for Iowa startups, but I'd love to see him. Maybe if there's a liquidity event for Dwolla at some point, he'll take what he makes on that, and put it back into Iowa companies. That would be just awesome. Right. Are there? I mean, I know you're doing the show and all that, but are there any like burning ideas that you want to sort of kickstart yourself and beyond just the news thing, a startup of your own?
Oh, that's a good question. It's strange. I've always kind of figured out that I'm an operations guy at heart. Like I love working on the next step. Like I love to be surrounded by these visionaries that are thinking about step 100, but what I'm passionate about is step 2, step 3 to get there. So that's kind of where I've always been in my career, is being around somebody who's just really hot about this idea but isn't sure where to go with it. And that's the things I've always done before. So being like with Welch Avenue is kind of my own thing. I'm having to play that vision guy a little bit on my own, but haven't got past that to any tech ideas that I like. I mean, I love being around startup people, and I love the technology community. So I think it'll all come together at some point, but probably not ready yet.
Gotcha.
Well, Kickstarter has been amazing for crowdsourcing. What do you think about like AngelList for funding? We were just talking about funding.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time on AngelList, and there are not a lot of people in this part of the country using it. I think that's our own fault for not doing that. We actually had kind of a competition going a couple years ago with Naval, where he created a specific Silicon Prairie region on AngelList to try to see, like, could we get to, 100 angels listed there, and the community fell woefully short of meeting the goal that we put out.
How many did you get up on there, like 20, 30, or do you remember?
Yeah, honestly, I don't even remember. There are investors here. I mean, there are lots of people that have made a lot of money. Like farmland is worth a lot of money right now, and so there are a lot of people here that have some cash ready to spend. I think part of our problem with the angels in the area, or the people that would be angels, is they don't understand tech investment because it's too risky and too different from what they're looking for. So rather than like getting invested here with your idea, people want to see the product. They want to see that you've made some revenue, and they're more likely to come in after there's actually a working prototype that's got revenue than they are like, oh, that's a great idea. Here's $25,000 to see what you can do with it this month.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and that's usually the MO of most angels, is they want to see traction, and they want to see ideally paying customers, which sometimes is not easy to do. But I'm glad those kids doing that little lecture hall. That's a great idea, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, they actually if you go to their website, I don't know when you guys are going to post this. I think we're live now, but I think tonight is when the new version of their software actually goes online because they just started the new school year. So the version that's out there right now isn't real pretty, but I've seen the beta for what's coming, and it's going to be a lot better. And it's interesting because these are guys that applied to TechStars and didn't get in, but got some great advice from TechStars because they were trying to get on as many campuses as possible. Like, let's just get the product out there as far as possible.
Right.
And TechStars basically told them, I think it was Andy Sack, they said, you guys haven't even figured out one school yet. Why are you on, trying to be everywhere? So they pulled everything back to the one school that they know, and now they're, like I said, when you see the product online now, they're really focusing on that advice.
Very cool. So it's Cluster Flunk, is that right?
Cluster Flunk, yep. And I asked them about the name, obviously, and he said they wanted a name that involved getting people together, and that's Cluster, and education in some idea. And he said they brainstormed all these ideas, and they came up with Cluster Flunk. And I was like, we can't call our company Cluster Flunk. And he said they just couldn't get it out of their head. And and he said one of their investors told them, like, that name is so bad that it's good. You can't forget that name, especially for college students.
That's true. Cluster Flunk. Yeah. It does have that that ability to stick to you. That's great. When we had some folks from Eugene, Oregon on, and he talked about the Silicon Shire, I think the term that they used out there, and I was like, Silicon Shire, wow, I never heard of that before. And then, of course, we had Shane from Startup Genome, and he talked about the Silicon Prairie. What's your thoughts with all the silicon this, silicon that? I just want to get your feedback on that.
I like it. I know that there are even people here that don't like the idea, but they feel like, if you Google the next Silicon Valley, just look at all the results that come up, and you will find like every region of the world will have some article stating that like Australia's Gold Coast is the next Silicon Valley, things like that. When we came up with the name Silicon Prairie News back in the day, this was like 2008, 2009. We weren't the first ones to call it Silicon Prairie. We've actually found magazine articles that go back to the 80s, and like Gateway Computer started here, and that was part of where that came about. Yeah, in Sioux City, Iowa.
That explains the cows. I guess a lot of farmland out there. Yeah.
Yep, I remember commercials when I was little for Silicon Prairie, for Gateway, talking about like on the Silicon Prairie, and so that name's been around, and different regions of the company call it. What I like about it is the word silicon, and there was I think it was an Inc. magazine article a couple of years ago that like tracked all the places in the country that say like Michigan is the Silicon Mitten, because of the shape of the state, and different things. And their point there was that the word silicon becomes a metonym for the kind of spirit and the attitude and the industrialized way that people regard Silicon Valley. Like it's the set of that community that is feeling and working towards that. It's not becoming the next Silicon Valley. It's becoming the best version of whatever they can. And I really liked it. I didn't do it justice, but I really like the way that article spelled it out. Just like Wall Street is the metonym for the financial market wherever, as Washington is for political. Like Silicon is the way that we've adapted that word around the world, and I think it's an awesome way to describe it, because the minute you say it, you may laugh when you hear it, but you know what we're talking about.
Right. No, I dig it too. I think it's a great idea. Yeah. Around here, sorry to cut you off, Jeff. We've been seeing a lot of co-working spaces pop up, and is that a trend you're seeing over there? Or?
Not as many. When I first moved back to Des Moines in 2009. There were co-working spots here. There were 2 of them, and people were utilizing them, but they both kind of like the business model of co-working was hard to sustain. And what's happened with one of them is like the founders of the co-working group kind of spun out their own company. It's called BitMethod. They make an iPad cash register product called Change.
Oh, cool.
Now, they got a big office that they could afford, and they just invited their friends, a lot of people they had co-worked with before, to like take offices with them.
That's great.
And so it's funny, I think they're more successful at co-working now that they're not trying to co-work, they're just working amongst their friends, than they were when they were trying to run a co-working place. And so I see that over and over again in Des Moines. So people get a little bit bigger. Office space is really cheap here, especially downtown, because a lot of our big industry has moved out to the suburbs in recent years. So they're just empty downtown buildings. Okay. Although it's rebounding a little bit right now. But people get bigger offices, they invite their friends in, and you get that co-working environment without really co-working. And the space that I'm in right now is Startup City Des Moines, which is kind of like one part incubator, one part co-working facility. And I think its real value is as a startup community's like town commons. So this is where user groups meet, and this is where you can just like run into people in the startup community here at Startup City. So it's not built as a co-working place, but it serves that function.
Feels that way. Gotcha. Do you see a big draw for people that are kind of getting a little traction in Des Moines to start moving towards the coast, New York or San Fran or LA, or does that, or have you felt that, or are you seen that at all?
That's a good question. Not really. I think what we've seen, the only one that we've really seen do that as a company perspective is the Dwala company I mentioned, and the bulk of the company is still here. They've since opened offices in New York and San Francisco, and some of the leaders have moved out to San Francisco in recent months for that company, but they're like, I run into them on the street here, so they're back and forth all the time.
That's cool.
And I think a lot of that is because it's pretty cheap to hire engineers in the middle of the country. Cost of living is cheap.
Yeah.
Schools are good. Like, the people are here. If you can find the people that are coding in the language you want them to code in, it's a great place. Actually, our guest on the show this morning is a company called Bunchball, gamification guys. You know them?
Bunchball.
They're in it's a California startup.
Oh,
about
Punchball. Yeah, Punchball. Sorry.
Bunchball, yeah, with a B. Yep.
Oh, Bunchball. Oh, maybe I'm thinking. Pull that up, Jeffy, if you don't mind.
So those guys, it was a great conversation with them this morning. They have 3 people from their engineering team that are based here in Iowa. They had one, they had on contract. He came on full time. He brought some others along with him over a couple of years, and they actually just brought the engineering team out here to Des Moines, and they spent 10 days here in Des Moines with the team and took them to the Iowa State Fair, which is kind of one of the biggest state fairs, and it had fun. So that was a lot of our conversation this morning. So it's almost reverse of what you're saying. It's not startups moving to the coast. It's a coastal startup finding value in hiring engineers in the middle of the country.
Right. Wow.
And there's a lot of people here that remote work for companies outside of the area, and so there's a little bit of that. And we did have a company recently. You guys, there's that Portland Nike Tech Accelerator. It's a TechStars. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's the Nike branded one.
Right.
So we had a sports startup here that was called RecBob, and they went out and participated in the first class in that. And they actually came back right after that. And I don't know that they'll be here forever, but they've pivoted. Now it's NextStep.io is the company, but. So it was good. I kind of thought like, oh, you get into a TechStars Accelerator, you're probably gone. So it was awesome to see those guys come back and
that's great
and participate here now.
Yeah, no, the cheap land, cheap rent. The only thing missing is fiber to the homes. Hopefully Google Fiber will pop up in there eventually.
Yeah, and Kansas City is only about 2.5 hours from here, so you'd be able to go to Casey Startup Village and check that out. There are lots of fiber to the home companies, especially in the suburbs. Like, I live in a more metro area, so I don't have it to my house yet, but the local ISPs are all trying to do the same thing and keep up.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah, it's awesome to hear entrepreneurs making it anywhere. Like you said, finding the advantages, and it's cheaper and, easier to breathe, in Iowa than in San Francisco, I'm sure. But what do you think the power of getting together physically, like you mentioned with these co-working spaces? I always find the irony of the internet. We spend so much time online and building these online tools, but, we still have this, like, primal need to gather together, to share ideas.
Yeah, I'm right with you. I could not work in my home. Like, I would go crazy just, for one, I'd be distracted by like dishes or laundry or whatever I'm supposed to be doing, or my son, kind of running around. So I think it is really important. But I think what it's enabled for us is that you can have that ability to work with other people. You can just choose the project you're working on because you may work with a company that isn't located around you. So, and that's what we have here with the kind of co-working at the place that I hang out. Which has just been awesome. Oh, I do want to say one thing too. Sorry, I'm jumping back to the earlier question about people that are leaving. There are lots of people who have left here. Like, I actually did a post for Silicon Prairie in January, February on, like, there are 10 people that have ties to the state of Iowa or like grew up here that are just doing amazing things in technology. And when you start, like, the founder of GitHub is from Iowa, and the guy who ran Obama's digital campaign, Harper Reed, went to college in Iowa, and Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz was born in Iowa.
Oh.
And you start, like, clicking off these people, like, because we live in a place where people often leave, they have these connections all through the world, really. And a big part of what I want to do with Welch Avenue is I call them expats, even though they're within the country most of the time. Like, right. I want to connect with those expats. And Ben Silverman, founder of Pinterest, is from Des Moines. things like that. I want to take these people and make sure that they're proud of the technology community that we have in this state and feel connected to it, and not feel like, man, I had to get out of Iowa. There's no way I could be successful there.
Right.
Even if they go, I'm cool if they go. I just want them to always be proud of being connected here. So I want to use the Welch Avenue company to reach out to them and keep them like with that newsletter, like, oh, I may not read the Des Moines Register every day, but I get the top tech headlines at least once a week.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, no, that's
Sorry,
a
that
great
was
idea.
a tangent, but
No, yeah.
No. That's
Glad our audience got that.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. I love the fact that you're kind of laying your stake in the ground there. You're like, okay, we're gonna do this here. We're gonna try to build this thing here, and that you're supporting the community there. Honestly, man, just like Jeff said, the internet is supposed to be freeing us from the physical location, and there's no reason why we can't have an office in Des Moines, and then of course possibly go out to San Fran to raise the money, and then go back, and that whole thing. So DeWalt is doing that, I think, in many ways.
yeah. Going back to my Silicon Prairie days a little bit, but I was keeping track. Like Dwala has done that. Ag Local is a Kansas City company that has Andreessen Horowitz in it, as well as I think USV might be in there now. Lightbank from Chicago is investing in Omaha companies. Like, it's not the norm yet, but we've proven that they're not afraid to get on a plane and talk to people, here and do that. And I know I talked to Ben from Dwala last week. I ran into him, and he said, like, yeah, they just had their board meeting here. So you had all of those guys with board seats at Dwala had been in Des Moines for that meeting. And if anything, that's like they know that Des Moines is a place and it exists, and it's maybe not what you've seen in movies, or and it's not what you see at the Iowa caucuses on CNN, where it's all standing in a cornfield and snowing. Like, this is a real place. People live here. There's technology. So
Right.
I just love hearing those stories.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Jeff, it's been great having you on today, man. If you're ever in Los Angeles, please, I will email you my phone number. I'd love to get together with you, and of course, Jeff, if you want to say hello to him in San Diego.
Down here in San Diego. Yeah, we could always shoot a podcast live.
That'd be great. You should. I saw on 1 Million Cups that San Diego is launching, I think next week for 1 Million Cups. So you should check that out.
Yep. Yeah.
Down there.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I looked that up when I was researching for the interview today, and you guys do yours every week, right? So I don't know if they're gonna do theirs on the same schedule, but I'm gonna have to check it out when they launch.
Yeah. I think most of them are. It's a great time, and I definitely I've never been to LA proper. I've flown into Ontario and then gone out into other parts of California.
Okay.
So I need to make that happen for sure.
Yeah. Well, next time you're out here, please look me up.
All right, guys. Sounds good.
Well, thanks again for coming on today, and we'll hopefully keep in touch.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.